I wanted to mention a quote that links this the military issue you were talking about. The former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan, this sort of links the military issue into the debt issue. This is a quote from him. He was the Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan. He said, "America's economic troubles will rapidly accumulate if the dollar loses its reserve currency role. To protect the dollar, the U.S. needs to curtail borrowing by halting its gratuitous wars and slashing unnecessary military spending, which exceeds the rest of the world combined. Cutting the budget deficit by halting unnecessary military spending and reducing trade deficits by bringing jobs back to America are simple tasks compared to confronting inflationary depression." So I did want to mention this issue of potential flight.
That's a fine statement there.
Yeah.
Who was that?
This is Paul Craig Roberts, and he's somebody that's not mentioned in corporate media much, but he was the Treasury Secretary under Reagan.
Look at why we went into Iraq. In the year 2000, Saddam Hussein had it with the American and the British, and he said, "I'm not going to trade my oil anymore in American dollars. I'm going to go to the euro. I'm going to break the OPEC treaty," which all countries, have to follow. And what did we do 2 years later? We were in Iraq. And what was one of the first things that we did? We changed their monetary policy and their trade policy. They went right back to trading their oil in American dollars. That is what is so important to keep our dollar to have any value anymore. It has to be tied.
Well, didn't Saddam threaten to take it off the dollar?
He did.
And that's
he did.
Right
and
Iraqi
profits increased over 20 to 25% when he went to trading in the euro.
I didn't know he'd actually done
he
it.
actually did it.
He actually did it.
We're seeing a serious move to replace the American dollar as the reserve currency, which could have drastic impacts to America. There's actually an organization formed recently called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's China and Russia and some other nations have organized. They see the American dollar as becoming potentially more and more potentially worthless, and they're starting to talk about replacing our dollar as the reserve currency. And we're even seeing these companies, the SCO, or these countries, they're starting to denominate their trade deals in dollars other than and currencies other than the dollar, and they're starting to unload their massive debt, American dollar debt that they've bought by buying businesses and natural resources around the planet.
They make a particular point of excluding the United States from those discussions.
Right. The U.S. asked to join the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They were rejected. They said, "No, America, you can't join." And there's a professor, Michael Hudson, recently wrote, China realizes that the American dollars are going to be worthless pretty quickly. And so they've realized this, and they own about $1 trillion of our dollars, and they're trying to get rid of them by buying resources around the planet.
There's a recent book by a very fine man, I can't remember his name right now, called In the Jaws of the Dragon. And basically, the thesis of the book is, supposedly trade with China was supposed to democratize China. Well, it hasn't. It has Confucianized us, elites at the top. But the point is, and he makes this point very clear in the book, Japan, China, and Korea all trade with each other, but they do not allow trade deficits. They have balanced trade with each other, and they all laugh at the United States because we have such huge negative balances with each of them.
Shocking news.
Anybody else has anything to say about the military or debt really quick? Maybe sum it up. But I meant to talk more about this issue of peak oil. But if you guys don't have anything else to say, we could mention this really quick.
Peak oil.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention really quick. It's really interesting. A recent report by the British government, and this is probably the most comprehensive and respectable report about peak oil that we've seen yet. And it's a really recent report. We know that America reached peak oil production in the 1970s, and ever since we've had an increasing dependence on foreign oil from unstable dictatorships in the Middle East, and arguably we've had to go to war for oil. So the British government just said that we are in fact going to reach peak oil very likely in the next decade or two. Certainly within the next 2 decades, and very likely within the next decade. And this is a really serious issue. So we definitely have to start thinking about moving off of oil. I don't know if you wanted to
the
say
problem is our whole economy, everything is based off oil, and it's based off cheap and plentiful oil. That we would have dependence on this is insane, on a finite resource.
And subsidized oil.
Yes,
Right.
and it's globalization. The trend of globalization will be overturned when oil becomes more expensive. But more importantly, everything that we make in the United States, a lot of our textiles is all based off these pharmaceuticals, our plastics are all based
everything
off
around
oils.
us is oil.
Look at our agricultural system. It's called the science of turning oil into food.
Right.
I mean, our whole system of food production is based off cheap and plentiful fossil fuels. Cheap and plentiful fossil fuels.
Pesticides and fertilizers are made from
Petrochemical fertilizers, petrochemical pesticides, especially nitrogen-based fertilizer, which was an invention after the 1940s. You saw our population peak going up because of nitrogen-based fertilizers. Without it, we wouldn't have GMO crops. We wouldn't be able to feed so many people. And you look at the world right now, and you look at how we have our population sitting on this pinpoint.
I'm really concerned that we aren't going to be able to support our population if we don't hurry up and find ways to produce food without oil.
If we do not go back to organic agriculture, if we do not remove ourselves from this fossil fuel economy, people will die. There will be massive famines. You will see food riots in the United States, and it will not be a good situation to be in a decade from now.
I was reading about Nigeria the other day, and since globalization, industrial farms have found it more profitable to ship the food out of Nigeria and sell it on the world market than to sell it locally. And they've really taken over all the local farms. Now, Nigeria used to be independent. It grew its own food, and everybody was happy. Now, they have almost 4 out of 8 people are nearing starvation. They're living on less than $1 a day. The situation is getting far worse, far quicker.
Nigeria, which should be one of the wealthiest African nations, because
because of the oil they've had.
I mean, they have all this resource. They should be wealthy, but
that's the problem with industrial agriculture. It's a reliance on distant macronutrients and fossil fuels. It's a recipe for disaster. And those things are going to rise in price and decrease in availability. So we're setting up a situation where we have this huge population dependent on fossil fuels. And when the fossil fuels are gone, what do we do with the population?
Well, how about little impacts like farm subsidies to like corn and rice farms in southern Arkansas, okay, that depend on water pumped up from the Oglala Reservoir, okay? Now, they drive the prices down, they ship it into Mexico, undercut the prices that they can produce it for there, drive millions of farmers out of business every year, and many of those have to cross our borders illegally in order for their families to survive.
And the vast majority, I mean, we grow millions of tons of grains in America, or rice, soybeans, wheat, and corn, but we're feeding the vast majority of the grains that we grow with all this massive amount of fossil fuels and unsustainable use of water. We're feeding the vast majority of the grains and food that we grow to animals in feedlots. And it's actually animal agriculture is one of the biggest causes of climate change. The way we're doing it right now, cutting down rainforests and these feedlots where we're using all these fossil fuels to make this grain. Hold on one second. And actually the UN made a report recently that said that 18% of climate change emissions are coming from animal agriculture, the way we're doing it. And the automobile transportation sector is only 13%. So actually, animal agriculture and eating meat is a bigger, how much meat we are eating is a bigger impact than what our cars that we're driving.
You look at